Look at the banknote in your wallet, or perhaps the digital balance on your banking app. For decades, we have taken one thing for granted: the supremacy of the United States dollar. It is the invisible oxygen of the global economy. When a merchant in Thailand buys electronics from a factory in South Korea, they don't usually use baht or won, they use dollars. When an airline in Brazil buys fuel, they pay in dollars. Since 1944, the dollar has been more than just a currency. It has been the world's operating system. But what happens when the computer starts to crash? What happens when the rest of the world decides they no longer want to use that specific operating system? Today, we are witnessing something that many economists thought was impossible just a decade ago. A group of nations, known as BRICS, has set in motion a master plan to dismantle the dollar's global hegemony. This isn't just a minor trade dispute or a temporary shift in the markets. This is a fundamental rewriting of the rules of civilization. There are many theories about how the West might fall, but today, I will present to you the three key pillars of the BRICS master plan. That could realistically ruin Western financial dominance as we know it. Are you ready to understand the tectonic plates shifting beneath your feet? To understand where we are going, we first have to understand how we got here. Why is the dollar so powerful in the first place? Imagine you are playing a game of Monopoly with your friends. Usually, everyone starts with the same amount of money, and the bank is a neutral entity. But imagine a version of the game where one player is the only one allowed to print the money used in the game. That player can never truly go bankrupt because whenever they run out of cash, they just print more. Meanwhile, every other player has to actually work, trade, and sell their properties to earn those same bills. Does that sound fair to you? Of course not. This is what economists call exorbitant privilege. For 80 years, the United States has enjoyed the ability to print the world's reserve currency. Because everyone needs dollars to trade oil, gold, and grain, there is a constant global demand for those green pieces of paper. This allows the United States to run massive debts that would bankrupt any other nation. If Argentina or Turkey printed money like the US does, their currency would collapse instantly. But the US can export its inflation to the rest of the world. Do you see the brilliance of this system? This system was solidified in 1971 when President Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Before then, you could technically exchange your dollars for actual physical gold. After 1971, the dollar was backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the US government. But the US did something very clever to ensure the dollar stayed relevant: the petrodollar system. They made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The US would provide military protection, and in exchange, Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exports exclusively in dollars. Since every country needs oil to run its factories and cars, every country suddenly needed to hold massive reserves of US dollars. This created a cycle where the dollar became the global neutral currency. But is it truly neutral? That is the question that the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, started asking themselves very loudly after the events of 2022. The first pillar of the BRICS master plan is the weaponization of finance. Think about this for a moment. If you put your money in a bank, you assume it is your money. You assume that as long as you didn't commit a crime, you can withdraw it whenever you want. But what if the bank manager decides they don't like your political views or your behavior? What if they suddenly freeze your account? This is exactly what happened when the West froze over $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves following the invasion of Ukraine. Regardless of your stance on the conflict, the economic message sent to the rest of the world was clear and terrifying. If the United States decides it doesn't like what you are doing, they can effectively delete your national wealth with the stroke of a pen. Do you think countries like China, India, or Saudi Arabia watched that happen and felt safe? They realized that the dollar is not a neutral tool. It is a leash, and if you pull too hard against the person holding the leash, they will choke you. This realization triggered a massive wave of de-dollarization. It's like a group of neighbors seeing one house get its electricity cut off by the main power company. Suddenly, everyone starts looking for solar panels and generators. They don't want to be dependent on a single source that can be turned off at any moment. This brings us to the core of the BRICS expansion. Recently, the group invited new members like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. Why does this matter? Because these are nations that control the world's energy and trade routes. When you have the world's biggest energy producers and the world's biggest energy consumers in the same room, why do they need an American middleman to facilitate their trade? Let's look at an analogy to make this clearer. Imagine you are in a small town where the only way to buy groceries is to use store credits issued by one specific billionaire. Everyone uses them because that's the way it's always been. But one day, the billionaire tells one of the townspeople they can no longer use their credits because of a private argument. The other townspeople start to get nervous. They decide to create their own trading system. They start trading eggs for milk directly, or they create a new town credit that the billionaire doesn't control. At first, the billionaire laughs. "My credits are the most trusted," he says. But slowly, the shopkeepers stop accepting the billionaire's credits. The value of those credits starts to drop because nobody needs them as much anymore. This is exactly what is happening on a global scale. China and Brazil have already agreed to trade in their own currencies. India is buying oil from Russia using rupees and dirhams. Even Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, has stated they are open to trading oil in currencies other than the dollar. This is a crack in the very foundation of the global economy. If the demand for dollars drops, the value of the dollar drops. And if the value of the dollar drops, everything imported into the United States becomes more expensive. This leads to a cycle of inflation that the Federal Reserve might not be able to control. Have you noticed how the price of your groceries and gas has been acting lately? While there are many factors, the weakening of the dollar's global grip is a silent, underlying force. But the BRICS Masterplan goes deeper than just using local currencies. They are working on a revolutionary second pillar, an alternative financial infrastructure. You see, it's not just about the currency, it's about the plumbing. Currently, most international bank transfers go through a system called SWIFT. It's based in Belgium, but is effectively controlled by Western interests. If you are kicked out of SWIFT, you are essentially cut off from the world. You can't send money, you can't receive money. It's financial exile. BRICS is building its own version. China has CIPS, Russia has SPFS, and they are working to link these systems together. They are creating a parallel universe of finance. This means that in the near future, the world will be split in two. One side will use the Western dollar-based system, and the other side will use the BRICS-based system. Why is this dangerous for the West? Because for the last 80 years, the West has used financial sanctions as its primary weapon instead of military force. It's much cleaner to freeze a bank account than to send a tank. But if the world no longer needs your bank, your sanctions become useless. It's like trying to ban someone from a club they have already left. The West is losing its soft power and its ability to dictate global behavior. Does this mean the dollar will disappear tomorrow? No, of course not. The dollar is still the most liquid and widely used currency in the world. It has what we call network effects. Think of it like Facebook. Even if you hate Facebook, you might stay there because all your friends are there. But if all your friends start moving to a new platform, eventually you will move too. We are seeing the beginning of that migration. Now, let's talk about something even more ambitious. The BRICS nations have been discussing the creation of a new common reserve currency. Some call it the R5 because the currencies of the original members all start with the letter R: real, ruble, rupee, renminbi, and rand. But this wouldn't be just another paper currency. There are high-level discussions about backing this new currency with something tangible, like gold or a basket of commodities. Remember how I said the dollar used to be backed by gold? BRICS is considering going back to that old-school stability. If they launch a currency that is actually tied to the value of oil, gold, and minerals, things the BRICS nations have in abundance, it would be incredibly attractive to investors who are tired of the dollar's inflation. Think about the psychology of this. If you are a wealthy investor in Dubai or Singapore, and you have to choose between holding a currency backed by a country with $34 trillion in debt, or a currency backed by actual gold and oil, which one would you choose? This is the master plan in its most aggressive form. It's an attempt to create hard money to compete with the West's fiat money. If the BRICS nations succeed in this, we aren't just talking about a shift in trade, we are talking about the end of the American century. The West's standard of living is built on the fact that we can buy cheap goods from the rest of the world using money we print for free. If that privilege is taken away, the cost of living in the West will skyrocket. The third pillar of the plan is the control of the supply chain. While the West has been focused on service economies and digital technology, the BRICS nations have been busy cornering the market on the physical world. They produce the vast majority of the world's steel, cement, wheat, and rare earth minerals needed for electric vehicles and smartphones. If they decide to only sell these essential goods in their own currencies, the West will have no choice but to comply. Imagine if tomorrow you could only buy a new iPhone or gasoline if you had BRICS coins. What would you do? You would have to sell your dollars to get those coins, further driving the dollar's value down. Do you start to see the scale of this? This is not just a bunch of countries meeting for a coffee and a photo op. This is a coordinated effort to escape what they perceive as Western economic colonialism. They are tired of the Washington consensus. They want a multipolar world where no single country can tell the others what to do. But this transition will not be peaceful or easy. The history of the world shows that whenever a dominant power is challenged by a rising power, tension is inevitable. We are entering a period of extreme volatility. The transition from the British pound to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency took 2 world wars and a Great Depression to finalize. Are we prepared for the chaos that a similar transition would bring today? As we look at the current state of the US economy, the signs are worrying. National debt is at record highs. Interest rates are fluctuating wildly, and internal political division is making it harder to address these issues. The BRICS nations see this weakness, and they are moving in. They are not waiting for the dollar to fail. They are actively building the replacement. But there is one final piece of the puzzle that most people are overlooking. It is a secret weapon that China has been developing for years, and it might be the final nail in the coffin for the dollar's supremacy. This technology could bypass the entire Western banking system instantly, making the dollar irrelevant in a matter of seconds. To understand how the BRICS Masterplan actually reaches its climax, we need to look at how they plan to use the digital world to conquer the physical one. This technology is known as the Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, but more specifically, it is a project called mBridge. For years, if you wanted to send money from one country to another, your transaction had to pass through a series of correspondent banks, most of which were located in New York or London. Each bank took a small fee, and each bank checked your transaction against US laws and sanctions. It was slow, expensive, and completely under the thumb of Western regulators. But mBridge changes everything. It is a digital platform developed by the central banks of China, Thailand, the UAE, and Hong Kong, in partnership with the Bank for International Settlements. It allows for instant peer-to-peer cross-border payments without ever touching the US banking system or the SWIFT network. Do you see the gravity of this? It is the financial equivalent of building a high-speed underground tunnel that bypasses every border checkpoint and every toll booth in the country. It makes the weaponization of finance completely obsolete. If the US tries to sanction a country on the mBridge network, the message will simply be, "We don't care. Your rules don't apply here." But why should you, sitting at home, care about digital tunnels for central banks? Because this is the infrastructure that will enable the third pillar of the master plan, the control of the physical world. For the last 30 years, the West has moved its economy toward intangibles. We focus on software, branding, financial services, and intellectual property. We essentially told the rest of the world, you do the dirty work of mining the minerals and building the products, and we will do the high-level thinking and hold the money. For a long time, this worked. But the BRICS nations have realized that in a crisis, you cannot eat software, you cannot build a missile out of branding, and you cannot heat your home with intellectual property. The BRICS coalition now controls the majority of the world's critical resources. Russia and Iran have the gas. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have the oil. China has the rare earth minerals and the manufacturing capacity. Brazil has the food. This is the revenge of the physical world. If these nations decide to link their currencies to these physical assets via a digital platform like mBridge, the Western paper economy will face a reality check like never before. Imagine a scenario where China says to the world, if you want our semiconductors and solar panels, you must pay in ECNY. Or Russia says, if you want our wheat and fertilizer, you must pay in gold-backed digital rubles. At that moment, the demand for the US dollar doesn't just decline, it evaporates. And here is the scary part. The United States has $34 trillion in debt. This debt is only sustainable as long as other countries are willing to buy it. Why do they buy it? Because they need dollars to trade. If they no longer need dollars to trade, they will stop buying US debt. They might even start selling the debt they already hold. This is what economists call a great liquidation. If the world dumps its US Treasury bonds, interest rates in the West will explode. Your mortgage, your car loan, and your credit card debt will become unmanageable. The government will be forced to print even more money just to pay the interest on its debt, leading to hyperinflation. Does this sound like a nightmare? For many people in the global south, this is simply the reality they have lived with for decades because of Western policies. Now, the roles are reversing. But we must ask ourselves a very important question. Is China's rise a better alternative? The US dollar system, for all its flaws, is based on a country with a transparent legal system, a constitution, and a degree of predictability. The BRICS nations, on the other hand, are a diverse group with very different political systems, many of which are authoritarian. Can the world really trust a currency system controlled by a coalition of rivals? This is the biggest hurdle the BRICS Masterplan faces. India and China, for example, are not exactly best friends. They have border disputes and are competing for leadership in Asia. Would India want to use a system that is dominated by the Chinese yuan? Probably not. This is why the BRICS are pushing for a basket of currencies or a neutral digital unit. They are trying to create a system that is trustless. In the world of blockchain, trustless means you don't have to trust the person you are trading with because the technology itself guarantees the transaction. By using distributed ledger technology, the BRICS are trying to create a financial system where no single country, not even China, has the power to press the delete button on someone else's wealth. Think about the philosophy behind this. The Western system is built on hierarchy. There is a top dog, the US, and everyone else fits in below. The BRICS vision is horizontal. They want a multipolar world where power is distributed. It sounds more democratic on paper, doesn't it? But in practice, it could lead to a fragmented world where global trade becomes much more complicated and expensive. We have enjoyed cheap goods for decades because the whole world used one currency and one set of rules. If we move to a world with 2 or 3 different financial systems that don't talk to each other, the efficiency of the global economy will plummet. This means prices for everything will go up permanently. We are moving from an era of globalism to an era of regionalism. Do you remember the concept of the Iron Curtain during the Cold War? It was a physical and political barrier that divided Europe. We are now seeing the rise of a silicon curtain and a financial curtain. On one side, you have the G7, the US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other side, you have the expanded BRICS. The middle ground is disappearing. Countries like Indonesia, Turkey, and Nigeria are being forced to choose a side. And guess what? Many of them are choosing BRICS. Why? Because the BRICS offer something the West often forgets: infrastructure without lectures. When the West lends money to a developing nation, it often comes with many strings attached: demands for political reform, environmental standards, and fiscal austerity. When China or the BRICS New Development Bank lends money, they usually just want to build a bridge or a port. For a leader in a developing nation who is trying to modernize their country, which offer is more attractive? This is the soft power shift that is happening alongside the hard power financial shift. The West is losing the hearts and minds of the Global South. And without the Global South, the West loses its access to cheap labor and raw materials. Are you starting to see how all these pieces fit together? It's not just about a currency, it's about a total systemic overhaul. The end of the dollar is simply the final step in a process that has been happening for 20 years. It started with the outsourcing of manufacturing, continued with the rise of the internet, and is now culminating in a financial revolution. What does this mean for your daily life? If the BRICS Masterplan succeeds, the American dream of infinite consumption will have to change. We will have to become producers again. We will have to learn how to live within our means as a society. For the average person, this transition will feel like a long, slow grind. Your purchasing power will diminish. You might find that imported electronics or clothes become luxury items rather than everyday purchases. You might see the government introducing its own digital dollar to try and compete with the BRICS system, which could lead to more surveillance of your personal spending. In many ways, the control that the BRICS are trying to escape from the US might try to impose on its own citizens to maintain stability. Is there any hope for the West? Of course. The US still has the most innovative technology sector, the most powerful military, and the world's most prestigious universities. The network effect of the dollar is still incredibly strong. Most of the world's debt is still denominated in dollars, which means countries still need to earn dollars just to pay back what they owe. This creates a short squeeze on the dollar that could keep its value high for much longer than people expect. Furthermore, the BRICS nations have their own internal problems. China is facing a massive demographic crisis and a property market bubble. Russia is bogged down in a costly war. India has massive poverty and infrastructure challenges. Building a new world order is much harder than criticizing the old one. However, we should not be complacent. History shows us that empires don't usually collapse because of a single invasion. They collapse from the inside out through debt, currency debasement, and the loss of global trust. The BRICS Masterplan is designed to accelerate this natural process. They aren't trying to destroy the US military. They are trying to make the US military too expensive to maintain. They aren't trying to invade the West. They are trying to make the West irrelevant. They are playing a long game, a game of economic Go rather than political chess. In the game of Go, you don't capture the opponent's pieces directly. You slowly surround them until they have no room left to move. That is exactly what the BRICS expansion is doing to the Western financial system. So, what is the conclusion? Are we witnessing the end of civilization? No. We are witnessing the end of a specific era. The era of unipolarity. The world is becoming more complex, more divided, and more competitive. The master plan is not a secret conspiracy. It is a public, multi-decade strategy that is being executed in broad daylight. We see it in the gold purchases by central banks, which have reached record levels. We see it in the creation of new trade routes that bypass the Suez Canal. We see it in the diplomatic shifts in the Middle East. Everything is pointing toward a great reset of the global power structure. But we must ask ourselves a very important question. Is China's rise a better alternative? The US dollar system, for all its flaws, is based on a country with a transparent legal system, a constitution, and a degree of predictability. The BRICS nations, on the other hand, are a diverse group with very different political systems, many of which are authoritarian. Can the world really trust a currency system controlled by a coalition of rivals? This is the biggest hurdle the BRICS Masterplan faces. India and China, for example, are not exactly best friends. They have border disputes and are competing for leadership in Asia. Would India want to use a system that is dominated by the Chinese yuan? Probably not. This is why the BRICS are pushing for a basket of currencies or a neutral digital unit. They are trying to create a system that is trustless.